Okay, today's movie review is a movie called Rosa Luxemburg, which is about Rosa Luxemburg. I'm actually breaking my system here slightly. What I normally do is kind of review new movies as I see them. I don't often feel the need to kind of, every time I rewatch a movie I've seen ages ago, I don't feel the need to kind of give my thoughts on all the movies I've rewatched. This movie is a rewatch. I actually saw it once before, way back when I was in college. It was on VHS at the time, back in those days, right? I saw it at the public library. I didn't know anything about it. I just saw it kind of in the public library in their movie section. And, I was a big history buff, so I recognized the name. I knew who Rosa Luxemburg is, and I thought, oh, great. So I rented the movie, and I didn't remember. Up until now, I've rewatched it now, but if you would have caught me yesterday, I hadn't remembered really anything of the movie over these years. I remembered that it was slow and boring at places, or at least I thought so. That's obviously a subjective measurement. And I remembered the final scene. The final scene sticks very vividly in my mind. It's not really a spoiler because it is history, right? So this is all matter of public historical record, I think. So with that in mind, I'll go ahead and spoil it. Although, consider this your warning. If you don't want to hear this, you can turn it off now. But the final scene, Rosa Luxemburg has been captured by the army. She's riding in the car. They shoot her in the head, and then they just dump her in the canal, and then the movie's over. So, yeah, kind of a shocking ending. There's no kind of attempt to soften it or say, if this was any other movie, they would have had like a reaction about her legacy or kind of shots to people she knows, kind of about how her spirit will go on, or maybe kind of some text at the bottom saying, even though she was killed, many people remember her today, or something like that. But no, not in this movie. Just boom, she's shot almost immediately afterwards, like within 10 seconds or 5 seconds of her being shot. She's being dumped in the canal, and then boom, the movie's over. Anyways, that's really all I remembered about it. Now, a couple days ago, I was on YouTube just kind of fooling around, and I discovered that this entire movie was on YouTube. And I thought to myself, I remember pretty much nothing of this movie from when I saw it 20 years ago. I remember the ending. I felt it was a little bit slow in parts, but that's it. So I'm kind of approaching this as if it were a new movie, because I remembered nothing from the previous viewing experience. So that's my justification for reviewing it on this channel. It is. I'll link to it down below. You can easily find it yourself. Just type Rosa Luxemburg into the YouTube search engine, but I'll link to it down below also. So it's all on YouTube now. You can watch the thing yourself. It's a foreign language movie, so it was made in West Germany in 1986. It's all subtitled, so you can follow along. I don't speak any German, so I just read the subtitles. It's, right. Where to begin? I guess maybe talking about the experience watching it. It is pretty slow in parts. And I think that's partly intentional and partly just kind of because of the way it was made at the time it was made. So, the thing about Rosa Luxemburg is she had an interesting life. She lived in revolutionary times, and she was a revolutionary. I'm stealing that line from somebody else. There was that big kind of uprising in 1918 was that was a big thing with a lot of violence and drama and stuff surrounding it. The movie doesn't really get into it, and I expect that's because of budget reasons, which is something else you notice throughout this movie. I think partly because it's a European film, and I think Europe has, Germany has less of a budget than Hollywood. And then partly because it's in kind of the 1980s. I've not researched this. There's not much to research, actually. I did try and look this movie up online. There's not a lot of material in English explaining this movie, but I'm 99% sure they just didn't have the budget to do kind of anything interesting. You definitely get that sense all throughout the movie. It seems at some point like it's a stage production. At other points, it just kind of reminds you of like a BBC production from the 1970s or 1980s. Just kind of this very small budget. And even kind of like the lighting and film quality. And I don't really... I'm not enough of a cinema expert to kind of describe it in technical detail, but it does give the impression of kind of, a TV movie from the 1980s, just the film quality on it. So I think basically they just didn't have the budget to kind of stage these big dramatic set pieces that, if you were doing this as a big budget Hollywood movie, you would show kind of Berlin and Revolution in 1918. And they couldn't do that really. There's a couple brief scenes, but for the most part, they're just kind of showing, Rosa Luxemburg in the offices talking about the revolution, or arguing with people about the revolution in the offices, but they can't actually show the revolution. So it's kind of hampered by the budget, for one. I also do kind of suspect, though, that if you were to talk to the film director, she would say, yeah, I'm not really interested in kind of showing those big revolution scenes. This is the impression I got just from reading her Wikipedia bio. It's a German woman, obviously. This is a German film, and her name is Margarete von Trotta. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. You can look her up on Wikipedia. She's produced a number of films about kind of prominent women in history. Rosa Luxemburg just kind of falls into that theme. And it says on Wikipedia that she's very interested in kind of showing the personal lives as well as the political lives and kind of the intersection between the two. And that is very evident in this movie. So that could be another reason why there's a less of a focus on kind of the big, dramatic, violent, revolutionary events, and more of a focus on kind of these smaller events. But you do also get the impression that they're hampered by their budget. All right, what else? I guess maybe it's as good as time as any to talk about what I just mentioned, is the fact that this kind of movie gets into the personal life of Rosa Luxemburg. Now, opinions are probably going to differ here. In fact, I suspect maybe I'm in the minority of this one. I love biopics. I mean, I'm a history nut, but I'm also a lazy history nut. I prefer to get my history from movies rather than cracking a book, if it can be helped at all. So I just love biopics. I'm a sucker for biopics, and I tend to like the historical parts of the biopic. What I usually don't like is when the biopic spends too much time on the family drama or the personal life drama of the subject. Because I'm of the opinion, who cares? I mean, we all have personal lives. That's not important. I want to know what were the big kind of events in their life on the world stage, and that's what I'm interested in seeing dramatized. This is a constant source of frustration for me because most of the biopics I watch don't do this. They spend a lot of time on the personal lives. Examples are almost too numerous to mention, but like Malcolm X. Remember there was that scene with Malcolm X kind of fighting with his wife. Or Selma, which was in part the story of Martin Luther King. There were those scenes of Martin Luther King fighting with his wife. Or that J. Edgar Hoover movie with Leonardo DiCaprio. There were the scenes with him fighting with his domestic partner. You know, all these movies have kind of the scene where their public life is beginning to take their toll on their personal life. And I think it gets cliche quickly. It gets to like it's the same beats in almost every biopic. Although arguably biopics are cliche by nature. I know there are people who argue that biopics just kind of follow a certain formula regardless. But it's, you know, it's of less interest to me. All that being said, I suspect I'm in the minority here. Number one, because Hollywood keeps doing it, and Hollywood wouldn't keep doing it if it didn't work well. Number two, I'm really the only person I know who complains about this. So maybe this works for everyone else. Anyways, for better or for worse, a lot of the screen time of this Rosa Luxemburg movie is made up with kind of her personal dramas. She's in love with one guy at the beginning, and then he sleeps with another girl, and they have a fight, and she ends up with somebody else. And just these personal details which do at times seem to be given equal prominence to the political stuff that's going on. I'm more interested in the political stuff, but you know, I guess people come to biography because they want some sort of human connection with the subject, right? If you wanted to just read an analytical history, those are out there. The attraction. Biography is the personal connection. That being said, actually, it bothered me much less in this movie than in other movies I've seen. It did kind of make sense in this movie that this did seem to be a big part of her life, and it did bug me a lot. I almost just feel like I have to bring it up because it's something I complain about in every other biopic. I'm worried that if I didn't complain about it in this case, it would make me look like I was being sexist, like, oh, I hate it when biographies about men focus on their personal life, but for a biography about a woman, yeah, her personal life sounds about right. I'm worried about kind of creating that imbalance, and so almost kind of feel obliged to complain about it. It wasn't terrible. It is kind of a slow-moving movie, though. Part because of the personal stuff. But then, you know, the lead up to the war, Rosa Luxemburg is going around doing some speeches, and there's some dramatic music playing, and she's, you know, the actress who's doing it is quite good. I think she won an award or something. But she's really giving these fiery speeches. And then she gets imprisoned, and she spends a long time in jail. And the movie focuses a long time about her time in jail and just kind of all the boring, mundane things about life in jail, like getting access to visitors, kind of getting access to her books, starting a garden in jail. And again, I think this was the intention of the filmmaker to show this, but it has a potential to get a little bit boring. When I watched this movie in college, I rented it from the public library and watched it all in one sitting and found it a little bit exhausting. What I did this time around, because it was on YouTube, is I would watch a half hour of it and then take a break and go do something else and then watch another half hour. So I watched it in kind of small chunks, and I think that made it much more watchable this time around. Getting into the political stuff now, because the movie does have a political side to it. So one of the things that I remember learning from my history classes at university, I took a course on modern European history. One of the things I learned was World War I, there was an expectation going into World War I that possibly the war wouldn't happen or couldn't happen because of the socialist parties. Now, I think this is something that gets a little bit forgotten because we tend to think of socialism now as something that only happens in like Russia or Cuba or something like that. But there were in the beginning of the 20th century, in most European countries, there were sizable socialist parties. They weren't completely in control anywhere, but they were becoming a major player everywhere. So there was a big socialist party in France. There was a big socialist party in Germany. There was big socialist parties in a lot of these European countries. In the socialists, of course, the doctrine of socialism is workers of the world unite. So the working class in Germany and France were not supposed to fight each other. They were supposed to fight the bourgeoisie, they were supposed to fight the ruling classes, but they weren't supposed to fight working classes in other countries. So, and this comes through in the movie. I think they quote this at one point in the movie. There was a statement released that said, we will fight our own rulers before we fight the workers of another country. This was kind of like the socialist doctrine at the time. It all completely fell apart at the outbreak of World War I. Just because, I guess, that the hysteria, the war hysteria was so infectious at the time that everyone just got so caught up in the war hysteria that the socialists, by and large, kind of believed that supporting their country in this war was more important than international solidarity. So the French socialists voted to support France in the war, and the German socialists voted to support Germany in the war. And the Socialist International completely fell apart. Now, if I remember my history right, this was the second Socialist International. The first Socialist International kind of fell apart with the squabblings between Marx and Bakunin, but it did get reinstated at one point. So this was the second Socialist International. Yeah, and it just completely fell apart. Now, we remember the names of the socialists who opposed the war. So, for example, in the U.S., Eugene Debs and Emma Goldman. And Emma Goldman was an anarchist, but an anarchist is a type of socialist. Were in prison for opposing World War I. And then famously in Germany, Rosa Luxemburg went to prison for opposing World War I. And we do kind of remember these names. But these people were not typical. By and large, most of the socialists supported their countries. And even some of the anarchists, Peter Kropotkin, who was like the most prominent anarchist of his day, supported the war. And the Socialist International completely fell apart, and World War I was not hampered at all by this big socialist movement. The movie portrays this very well. I mean, it was something I had learned in my history classes way back when, but it's also a big point in this movie. So Rosa Luxemburg is she's part of the German Social Democratic Party. German Social Democratic Party is finally getting to the point where it's commanding a large part of the Reichstag, where it's kind of getting into a lot of power. It's not complete power, but they're a major player at this point. Rosa Luxemburg wants to oppose the war, but most of the other German Social Democrats are either afraid to oppose the war or they honestly believe in the war. And so this is a major plot point in kind of the middle of the movie. Rosa Luxemburg is trying to oppose the war. She's going around giving speeches opposing the war. She's devastated by how the betrayal that she views from the other people in the German Social Democratic Party, and then she ends up kind of in prison because she opposed the war. It's just really a fascinating period of history. There's just a number of things to comment on this. They have the speeches in the movie, and I actually don't know if these are verbatim real speeches that Rosa Luxemburg gave or excerpts from them, or if they're something that they made up from the movie. But the actress playing her is quite powerful, and you get kind of caught up in these speeches where she's saying, we will refuse to fight, we're not going to go and kill our brothers, war is a terrible thing for humanity. And especially because we, the modern audience, are watching this with the benefit of 2020 hindsight, where we know that World War I was a terrible war. And it was so, so bad for humanity. And it was so pointless. So you're kind of going, yes, yes, yes. But then the irony is, she gets locked away in prison for it. And, maybe this is a bit cliched to say, but it's true sometimes. Sometimes it's just insane the way civilization operates. Where kind of Rosa Luxemburg was trying to stand up to kind of stop this slaughter and ended up being condemned by respectable society and thrown in prison for that. And not only that, but they talk in the movie about, all these slurs that she gets picked up from the press, right? They call her Red Rosa or Bloody Rosa. I mean, like, imagine she gets called bloody, but she's the one trying to stop the war, right? And the other strange thing, and this is all kind of, I think, real history, is how that war hysteria about World War I just swept all through Europe. And it was equally the same on both sides. So the French socialists were just as riled up about supporting France's cause as the German socialists were riled up about supporting the German cause. Just kind of both sides of this war were completely convinced that they were in the right, that this was a matter of national defense, that this was so important to support this war cause, even if it meant kind of destroying the Socialist International. There's a scene in the movie when Rosa Luxemburg kind of finds out that the Social Democrats in the German Congress have voted against the war. And they kind of, they come out and they're talking to her and they say, Rosa, listen, if a robber came into my house, I wouldn't talk about all this stuff about brotherly love or the love of all mankind. I'd shoot the robber. And, in their mind, Rosa Luxemburg is just being a child with this infantile stuff about peace and brotherly unity and kind of the unity of man. And they're like, won't you just kind of won't you just be reasonable about this? But the irony is, these are the Germans saying this, right? I mean, I hate to say there is a right and wrong side to this war because World War I was so pointless, and maybe I'm showing my American bias here. But, the Germans were certainly not in the right side of this war, and yet they were just... That was a mindset, that this kind of attempt to seek common solidarity with man was just a stupid, infantile, childish thing. And the responsible thing to do was support the war. And I know people say, okay, well, yeah, that's the Germans. The Germans were always bloody and militaristic. But, the exact same thing happened in France and England. And in America. The Americans sent to jail Eugene Debs for opposing the war, Emma Goldman for opposing the war. Quakers were sent for opposing the war. And I don't know if you've heard this before. This is one of the points Christopher Hitchens used to make quite a lot. You know that old saying, we have free speech, but you can't shout fire in a crowded theater? That saying comes from Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who said it as his excuse to put the Quakers in jail who were opposing World War I. Like, that's where that saying comes from. He thought that opposing World War I was so dangerous, it was like shouting fire in a crowded theater. And then Christopher Hitchens, throughout his entire life, whenever somebody would make that analogy, Hitchens would say, that's stupid. Do you know where that saying comes from? Sorry, I've completely gone off on a tangent now, huh? I'm no longer even talking about the movie. Point is, I guess, that's a section of Rosa Luxemburg's story that the movie does so well. They show her speeches against the war. They show the Social Democrats kind of not betraying the International Socialist cause. And yeah, then they show her going to jail for attempting to preach peace and brotherhood. Yeah, and there's another scene where she's in the jail and she's in the bath and she's kind of talking to the guards, and she said, you know, used to be workers of the world unite. Now we've changed it. Workers of the world unite in peacetime, but in war slit each other's throats. I'm not sure if that's an authentic Luxemburg quote, if they just made that up for the movie, but you know, that sums it up nicely, just how the socialist parties in France and Germany and in Europe just kind of completely dropped the ball on that. Yeah. What else is there really to say about this movie? That might be kind of the major things I wanted to say about it. It does get a little bit slow in parts. It does not have the pacing that you would expect from a modern Hollywood movie. Sorry, there's a knock on the door. I'm just going to end this video early. I think I've said most of what I wanted to say.